You're in tune to Chicago's number one college radio station, 89.3 is WKKC. This is Focus Talk, and I'm your host, Dennis Snipe. Needless to say, the issues that we face as it relates to race are alive and well. We know that based on the fact of what's going on in Ferguson, what has gone on in Florida with Trayvon Martin, and then what took place in New York with Eric Garner. Racial issues are around us, and they've been that way for quite some time. However, my guest today, Ms. T.J. Morris, will talk about her book entitled Blood is Thicker Than Color, which talks about a very specific issue that went on many years ago, but I want to welcome her to the show and get her opinion. How are you today?
I'm just fine, Dennis. How are you?
I am well. Now, your book, Blood is Thicker Than Color. Give us a little synopsis as to what it's about.
Blood is Thicker Than Color is a historical fiction based in the 1920s, and it's based on a story from my paternal grandfather's life. My paternal grandfather got into an incident with the sheriff in Mississippi, down in Carroll County, Mississippi, and a woman was killed in the crossfire. Anyway, he had to end up running up north to hide out. My grandfather was very, very light-skinned, and he passed himself off as white. You know, he had to change his name, and he did all of these things while he was in Chicago. And then eventually he got caught. Okay, he got caught. They took him back to Mississippi. They put him on trial. And fortunately for my grandfather, his lineage was connected to an ex-governor of Mississippi, which was Earl Leroy Brewer. And he had been governor from 1912 to 1916. And I won't tell you the rest of the story. They have to read the book.
Okay. What inspired you to write about this specific incident in your family's history?
I got to the point where I felt like the story just needed to be told. Mm-hmm. It was a story within my family. Everyone knew bits and pieces, or everybody under, let's say, my grandfather's line or on his lineage line or branch of the family all know the story, okay? Or they've heard bits and pieces of the story throughout life, throughout time, from their fathers, from their grandparents, and all this kind of thing. And as I started to venture into the genealogy, and I wanted to know more about the governor, that's what kind of started the whole thing. Because my father had left me this information as a child. And I had really forgotten all about it. I forgot that I had actually written the story because my dad didn't read well. He didn't spell well. And so anyway, here I was, venturing on doing this book, and I'm looking at this information that was left. And my sister says, well, how did Dad leave us this information? Dad didn't spell well, he didn't read well. And then I was able to recall that I had actually written this information at the kitchen table as Dad dictated the family stories. So this was the beginning of it. I wanted to know more about the governor. As I learned more about the governor, I had to start to put the pieces of the puzzle together, because I had pieces. I had point A, point B, point C, but the math had to add up. So that meant I had to do the research. I had to, continue to research and find out who he was. And plus I wanted to know how he was actually related to me. Dad didn't know how he was related to us. He just knew he was kinfolk. So I said, okay, I need to know how this man is related to us. So through the research, I was able to figure out how he was related to us. And then I was able to put the pieces of the puzzle together and make sure that the math added up.
What type of research did it take? Did you have to contact some of the courthouses? Did you have to talk to other individuals who are griots of the family who may have held the information verbally and sit down and write it out, or talk to other individuals who may have been friends of the family? What was that process like?
Actually, I did all of those things. I had to do a lot of researching. I did a lot of online research, Ancestry, that type of thing. Like I say, I had pieces to the puzzle, but I had to find them, and I had to be able to add things up because Daddy had told me about Jane, and Jane was the slave. Okay, well, I needed to find Jane. Who was Jane? Because I needed to find Jane so I could find my grandfather's or my great grandfather, which would have been her son. I needed to be able to find him. I did take a trip to Mississippi. I did go to Clarksdale because I wanted to know, like I said, at that particular time, I was still trying to figure out who the governor was and how he was connected to me. Well, the governor spent a lot of his lifetime, as he was older anyway. That's where he retired and everything was in Clarksdale. So when I went to Clarksdale, it was very interesting because I ended up going to the library and I go in and, I wanted to look at some microfiche film, right? So I'm asking a lady about some film, and she says, well, who are you looking for? She said, what's the name? I said, Brewer. And I knew as soon as I said that she was going to say, oh, there's a lot of brewers, because there is. Mississippi used to be full of a lot of brewers in Mississippi. And at that time, especially the time period I'm talking about, 1920s or even, the 1800s, late 1800s, the brewers had a lot of power in Mississippi. So I knew as soon as I said that name, she was like, and then she said, well, are you looking for Governor Brewer? I said, yes, I'm looking for Governor Brewer. And I left it at that. Mm-hmm. I didn't tell her that Governor Brewer was related to me, or that I was researching him to find out our family connection. And then she goes, oh, well, we have a whole cage of information, on special people, famous people, whatever. So she said, oh, there's a lot of information in the cage on Governor Brewer. So I was like, oh, great, jackpot, So I go, my girlfriend was with me. We go into the cage, and it was a special cage. I mean, you had to lock your purse up and you couldn't take it in, and, all this stuff. But it was kind of funny to me because you could copy anything that you wanted to. So I'm like, okay, so we get in there. So I'm just pulling out information. There were letters in there that his daughter had written about his life. There were other articles from newspapers about him because, like I say, he was a governor. And then she also told us, the librarian also told us where the mansion was that he had built. He had a mansion that was a duplicate of the governor's mansion in Jackson. I guess he loved living in there so much that he had enough money to build one. Okay, and it was gorgeous. It was about 4 blocks from the library. So after we finished in the library, we went around to the governor's mansion and took pictures of it and looked at the governor's mansion. But it was really, something to see. And it's still there, beautiful old home, built in the probably, I guess, early 1900s, with the big columns outside. It's just a really gorgeous home. So anyway, I went there. I did go to Jackson. I went to the Department of Archives. I went to the jail house. At the time I went to the jailhouse, I wasn't real specific about the date, I guess, or time frame that I was looking for. I wasn't thinking correctly or something. And they had old journals, but there was so many fires in Mississippi. A lot of information got burned up, got lost. And they had books, but they weren't real helpful because now it's so many people doing genealogy that, sometimes they just don't want to look up the information. But the guy was like, unless you can give me a specific date as far as my grandfather going to trial, he was like, I can't find it for you. Because he was like, there's books back there, but they weren't in any order. And he was like, you got to give me a date, and I didn't know the specific date. So I needed to do some digging. I knew a period or a general, period of when, but I needed to give him an exact date. So I wasn't able to get him to pull a journal for me as far as that went. But it was interesting. It was a very interesting visit.
So what did you learn through this entire ordeal, or what was your takeaway?
My takeaway was that I'm almost kidding. Mississippi was, okay, first of all, they still had the Confederate flag up. So I was kind of like, okay. My girlfriend was like, they still got the Confederate flag up. Okay, and then I went to the library and in Jackson, and I thought it to be very unusual, or how can I say, I was looking for information on Governor Earl Leroy, but I couldn't find any in Jackson, and I thought that to be very strange in a sense. But what it taught me was that basically they buried him. He was even though he was a white man, he was a man that was fighting for human rights at that time. And it was just wrong. It was a wrong, era. The Ku Klux Klan was, still doing what they were doing. The South was still the South, even though things had changed up north some in Chicago, where my grandfather had run to. But things that were going on in the South were still the South. And even after the governor, once his period of 4 years of being governor was over, it's like he didn't exist. It was like he had never been governor.
So do you feel that that was because of his desire to help mankind and not just a particular race or a particular culture, but people in general?
Yes, I do. Yes, because I really believe that he was a man that was fighting for human rights. And that's how he ended up being a civil rights lawyer before he died, because he did end up helping a lot of people of color.
So moving forward, and the name of your book, Blood is Thicker Than Color, takes us to a very interesting point, in my opinion, as to from, let's say, 100 years later?
Yes, just about.
Just about 100 years later to modern day times, and we are still dealing with some of the same issues. So with what you've learned through your research and what you've captured in the book, what can you say to those individuals who are in, I guess you could say, power now, or who are in leadership? What can we learn from Blood is Thicker Than Color?
I think we can learn that the basics or the base of the inequality, the things that we are trying to fight, the civil rights issue, it's still there. I mean, we've grown a lot. Yeah, we can vote now, and we
sound so enthusiastic.
We can use the same washrooms and things of that nature. But the basic issue of race or discrimination, the fight continues. To me, that fight has not changed. I almost dedicated this book to the fight. I was going to put that in the book, and I didn't. But it hasn't changed in that respect to me. I think a lot of those things, I wrote the book so that people can start to understand or even get into some of the things that were going on. Like from the history perspective, there's things in the book or people in the book that people may not have necessarily heard about. And I tried to talk about some of those people. I tried to talk about Alberta Hunter. People don't necessarily know who Alberta Hunter was, but she was a great singer. She was a great jazz singer, blues singer during that time. But a lot of people have been lost in our history, or we didn't really hear about them. We know about, Cap Calloway and, all these people, but we don't know about her.
Now, that's an excellent point that you bring up, that we don't know about certain individuals who may have played a key role in history. So riddle me this. Whose fault is that? Is it the individuals who don't know for not digging, or the other individuals for not telling?
That's an interesting question. For not telling. Well, I think it's both. I think it's trying to, we definitely have a tendency to try and change history. And I'll give you an example, okay? And even with the book, of course, the book does have, the N word in it. Mm-hmm. And now, society is, we're going to get rid of the N word. They're trying to take, the books out of the schools. They want to get rid of, To Kill a Mockingbird. They want to get rid of Mark Twain's books. You want to get rid of all the books that have the N word in it. Okay. But you can't change history. And that's the thing that gets me. How you just going to erase history? It's like I was doing some research online, and I ran into one article, and it was talking about the dunk game. Okay. Where we used to, and I talk about it in the book, it was called the in dunk game, right? But they had changed the title and made it the African American game. Now, we definitely were not African Americans
at that time.
Mm-hmm. You can't just change history like that, and that's the thing that gets me. You want to say, well, no, we're going to take it out. But you can't change history. So I think that's another reason why I wrote this book. It is historical. Yes, but I didn't want to change history either. And I wanted to bring out some other historical points. Like I talk about White City. White City was an amusement park. It was a real live amusement park. It's not a fiction part of the story. It was a real amusement park in Chicago. And when you think about Chicago and the way it's made, you say, yeah, okay, because the train ran right there. It was right here, actually.
Right. And here in Inglewood.
Right here in 63rd Street. It ran over to Cottage Grove. It was over by the Grand Crossing area.
Right.
But it was right on right at 63rd. And people could take the train. They could go there. It was a strictly white amusement park for whites only. It was called White City. But it did exist. But a lot of people still may not know, about this.
It's history, right?
It's history. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's still history. So these are the type of things that I try to talk about in the book. And I think we still relate to them today because some of these things are still here. I know there's at least one or two buildings, I believe, still left from the White City.
The Museum of Science and Industry. Or the Field Museum.
One of those.
Right.
Might be both of them, but it's like, okay, yeah, there's buildings, everything, there's still something here from that history, from those times, and it's still here today. And then we move forward, we look back. Let me put it this way. Okay. I'm Buddhist, Dennis. Okay. Mm-hmm. And in Buddhism, we deal with past, present, and future. Okay, so it's like, okay, we know the past. Okay, we're in the present. And we got to get to the future, right? Mm-hmm. But the future is going to be determined on what the present is, or what causes we're making now, how we come to understand now, what are we doing now? So now, in this present time, I'm writing this book, Blood is Thicker Than Color, hopefully to be able to help educate and not forget the future.
Okay.
And don't forget the past. Because it all comes together. It's all interconnected. It's the interconnectedness. And we have to be able to understand. You got to understand where you came from in order to understand where you're going.
Okay. What's next on the agenda for TJ Morris?
Next on the agenda for TJ Morris is I'm really leaning toward writing a codependency book. And that's basically because I'm a codependent. I've always been one. I have a lot to say about codependency. I actually used to facilitate a codependency group for about 7 years. Oh. And I'm thinking about that unless I can find another timepiece or historical fiction that I want to write. Okay. Otherwise, I'm kind of leaning toward the codependency book. So,
do you promise to come back and talk about it when you pen the book?
Oh, sure. I'd love to come back.
Okay. Sounds good. Give us a few closing words.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for having me here.
You're welcome.
Today. And like I said, the name of the book is Blood is Thicker Than Color. That can you can find it on Amazon.com. Mm-hmm. And it's a historical fiction from the 1920s. I think it's a very educational book. It's an easy read. I didn't make it complicated. I didn't want a lot of big words in it because our youth need to read it. So I hope that, people will go out and buy this book, give it to a young person, let them read this book and let them learn more about the history of Chicago and the struggle and coming to understand why a lot of people are the way they are. It's like my daughter. I'm going to close, I guess, with this story. My daughter's, she's older now, but when she was a little younger, she didn't quite understand her grandmother, my mother, right? And my mother had this thing, about, we'll say prejudice, between blacks and whites, right? And my daughter's like, I don't understand grandma, but, as she talked to her grandmother, she came to understand her grandmother, as my mother shared stories about, being as segregation, closed out and things opened up, and that neighborhood store that had the water fountain, that the blacks couldn't drink out of. Okay, well now, it's kind of ended and we can drink out of the same water fountain. Well, not necessarily, because when my mother went to drink out of that water fountain, the man had taken it out because he didn't want us to be drinking out of it. So, if we understand our history, I think we understand, why people are so angry in Ferguson. It hasn't changed much. Things are still, we still end up with the short end of the stick. So, and there's no justice necessarily done. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your contribution to our present by penning a book about our past so that we can be properly prepared for our future.
That's correct. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that. And I look forward to the next work that you'll pen.
I look forward to talking to you about it.
All right. TJ Morris, author of Blood is Thicker Than Color. Thank you so much. And we'll talk again real soon.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.